I don't do response videos all that often, largely because I feel many aren't worth the time to make a response to. That said, Enclave Emily covered a video somewhat recently, and after watching her video responding to the Old Knight and hearing his arguments within this video, I realized I wanted to make my own response. Now, I am mentioned in this video, and part of his examples that show up at the start feature 5 of my videos, but that's not the reason I've decided to respond to this video. Over the past few years, there have been a number of videos that have called me out or mentioned me in some way that appear to be trying to bait a response or reaction from me, and I tend to ignore those videos. The internet being what it is, people are going to have their beliefs about you, and oftentimes there's little that can be done about that, and it's not worth fighting with every rando who has a misconception about you. Even with this video I'm responding to, I don't particularly care what he says about me personally, and I know this is the kind of person that I'll never be able to convince otherwise, so I'm not even going to bother. What got me interested in responding to this video was due to some of the arguments he makes, and because I thought it would make for an interesting, or at least entertaining video, to respond to some of the arguments within his video. Not because any of them are good, mind you, but because they serve as a nice example.
Fallout fans are absolutely insane. And you might be thinking, but I'm a fan of Fallout and I'm not insane. Well, you're wrong, and let me show you why.
Just a quick note on this section while it plays. I'm muting the music he plays here because I don't even want to take the risk, but he is playing music here.
Now, you probably noticed that is a lot of negative Fallout content. It's mostly about Fallout 3, Fallout 4. I didn't even show you Fallout 76 and the show because that would fill up my entire screen 75 times over. Even from an incredibly positive Fallout channel, like this one right here. It's very positive about Fallout, very positive about 76 in the show. Their most popular video is complaining about a Fallout 4 update that broke some mods.
I'm gonna be upfront and rather blunt about my opinions here, but I feel like this is the kind of person who can't tell you how he'd feel if he didn't eat breakfast. He's the kind of person who would answer, "But I did have breakfast." He's laser focused on the fact that there's a lot of negative videos about Fallout 3 and 4, but doesn't stop to question why that might be. It is seemingly the very existence of such content that is the problem. He also doesn't seem to consider basic context at all. A fairly small YouTube channel, no offense intended towards follower Toshi, but it kinda makes sense that one of his most viewed videos would be one about the update that broke mods for many people. A big update comes out and uniquely breaks mods in a way that most updates don't, and a lot of people will be looking for news or information on it, especially given the fact that most people who play these games have dozens or potentially hundreds of mods installed on their games. What do you do when a game you really like breaks in some way? You Google it, or search YouTube to see if you can find out what the problem is and what the solution is.
The vast majority of popular content on YouTube is about Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and New Vegas. Now, Fallout 4 and 76 do have some normies, and there are some shorts that keep that content popular, but it's not even near the level of Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas.
He corrected it with text on the screen, but didn't bother to re-record his line. But what he intended to say was, the vast majority of positive content on YouTube is about Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and New Vegas. Pro tip, always re-record your lines when you make a mistake like this. It is not worth keeping mistakes like this in your video, and correcting it with text is not enough. So now we've got our dichotomy set up. There's lots of positive content about classic Fallout in New Vegas, and there's lots of negative content about Bethesda Fallout. It will be some time until we get back to this.
And honestly, part of this hype, and a little personal anecdote, this isn't really relevant to my argument, but I was very hyped up for New Vegas. I never played it when it came out. I didn't really hear about it. And so I played it for the first time this year. And I was told that it was a masterpiece, that its writing is perfection, that it's the greatest game ever made.
Let's take a look at why Fallout New Vegas is the best game ever made.
And that as long as I could look past the bad gunplay, the bugs, the crashes, and some of the janky systems, I was in for the best writing I've ever experienced in any video game.
Do you just believe everything you're told with no critical thinking? Do you really think that someone being hyperbolic by saying it's the best game ever made actually means it's the best video game ever made? Do you feel lied to that it wasn't actually the best video game ever made? How would you feel if you didn't eat breakfast this morning?
That the morality was gray, that it was very serious, there wasn't this jokey Bethesda tone.
Yes, that's true. I mean, sure, there's some humorous moments and some jokes thrown in here and there, but they're things that generally make sense within the world, or are otherwise appropriately sectioned off to ensure you understand that they're not meant to be treated as the true experience.
And then right away, I met with characters named Sunny Smiles, a cowboy who's a robot, a guy who tries to rob you, and when you have your back turned shooting geckos, he ignores you, and then he runs up to talk to you and says, haha, now I'm gonna rob you.
Your examples of the game being silly as a character's name, and a robot that has an image of a cowboy on its screen, and an encounter you didn't like? What's wrong with the name Sunny Smiles? What's so unusual about it that makes you think this is the jokey Bethesda tone? Is it because it's a slightly unusual name? I've genuinely never stopped to consider her name because it's not treated as being explicitly unusual, and just in general, it doesn't seem that strange to me. She isn't named Klamox the Devourer or anything like that. Did you know that a real name that real people have in the real world is Guy? As in, hey, do you see that guy over there? Guy Ritchie is a filmmaker who's made some pretty great movies. I've heard he's also made some good shows too, though I haven't gotten around to watching them yet. There's also Guy Fawkes. Point is that the name Sunny Smiles just never seemed like it was particularly unusual to me, especially in a post-apocalypse setting. But now that you've got me thinking about it, old knight, what if it was a nickname? Or alternatively, what if that was just the name she was given because she was upbeat and positive? There is no given explanation for her name in-game, and I don't think one is necessary. But more importantly than anything else, not only is Sunny a real first name, both spelt with a U and with an O, but there are also people with the last name Smile or Smiles. A quick Google search was all it took to find this out. As for the cowboy robot, again, I ask you, what is so silly and weird about this? Where is the jokey tone? How does it make it not serious? The game certainly isn't treating him like a joke. Is it purely because he has a screen that displays the image of a cowboy and he talks like one? Are you really that shallow as a person? You seem like the kind of person to dismissively scoff at anything that is even slightly outside of your expectations. That you can't take something seriously because it's slightly unusual. It does not at all seem outside the realm of possibility that someone might program their robots to have different personalities for whatever reason they may have. I don't see how that at all impacts the tone at all. We're not talking about Claptrap from Borderlands here, we're talking about a robot that's simply programmed to look and act a certain way. Finally, the encounter with the geckos. Well, he's not trying to rob you. You show the evidence on screen yourself that he wanted you to take care of the geckos so he could get to the stash of items up the hill. At least try not to contradict what's blatantly on screen at the very moment you're saying it, please. Sure, it's a bit silly and dumb for him to say he's going to kill you, rather than just doing it once you took care of the geckos. If I had to guess, it was done this way because if he just started shooting you when the geckos were all dead, it would have confused players as to why the guy they're helping suddenly turned hostile for no apparent reason. This is one of the more clunky things you just kinda have to deal with in games sometimes, because it's often difficult or impossible to convey all the information the player needs to understand what's happening. So you got one kinda out of 3.
And I think, okay, whatever, a few moments. And then I get to Boone, one of the companions, and spoiler, don't listen if you actually really care about the story. But it's got a meaningful backstory. His wife was kidnapped by slavers, which is like a legit faction, people that just kidnap people and enslave them, and that's supposed to be like gray morality.
What do you mean that kidnapping and enslaving people is supposed to be gray morality? I've listened to this part back several times, and I'm just not getting what you're trying to say. Is it that slavery in the game is presented as morally gray, or is it that you've been told the game is morally gray, and therefore expect everything in the game to be morally gray, and you take issue with that because slavery clearly isn't an example of gray morality? I mean, both answers reflect poorly on you, but I can't possibly imagine what else you can mean.
But basically, he shot his own wife in the head, who was pregnant with his kid, to stop her from becoming a slave.
To stop her and his unborn child from becoming slaves. The fact he missed this crucial detail kinda tells me how much attention he was paying to the game. But it makes sense, it's a stupid game with a cowboy robot and someone named Sunny Smiles. Who would ever bother paying attention to such rubbish?
And then he wants you to do an investigation for him. And he asks you to lure someone out in front of this building and put a hat on, and he'll know to shoot that person in the head. Now, you're a stranger, and you can choose to pick anyone with no evidence and just have him shoot him in the head. And this makes him very angry with you if you just lure someone at random, or you don't have good evidence, or you just lie to him and you have him shoot his buddy. And, that's really fucking stupid. You could have just went up and talked to him and said, hey, it's this person, here's the evidence. But instead, he, willingly decides to put himself in a situation where he can be tricked because somebody might get suspicious if you go and visit him a second time and talk to him.
We're not even 3 minutes in, and I'm firmly convinced he can't answer the breakfast question. This is also a bit of a cardinal sin of making videos, but he fails to properly explain himself here and tries to fix it by adding additional text on screen as he waffles on in his recording. What his argument boils down to here is, this is stupid because I said so. He fails to explain why it's stupid, he just insists that it is. In fact, he even added this bit on screen, likely realizing that he didn't explain himself here, and rather than properly fixing it by recording the necessary lines to explain himself, he just expects you to be as incredulous as he is towards something that is totally reasonable. It appears as though his argument is that it's dumb that you can't confirm the evidence with Boone, because his logic is flawed that the people of Novak shouldn't know that he knows what happened to his wife. First and foremost, the Legion is one of the most powerful factions in the Wasteland at the moment, and the greatest threat the NCR has come up against, ignoring the antagonists of Fallout 1 and 2, as the NCR barely existed in a single settlement in Fallout 1, and they still aren't big enough to even face the Enclave in Fallout 2, and likely don't know about their plans anyways, with the Enclave being secretive and hostile to outsiders. Not only that, but it's also common knowledge that the Legion has spies everywhere. Boone is not a priority for them, because he's more or less a random veteran who isn't in active service. But should they find out he knows what happened to his wife, he would become a bigger target, because he is a first recon sniper who is very skilled at killing and would pose enough of a threat to the Legion that they'd want to get rid of him should he actively start hunting them. Which is one of his endings, by the way. It is perfectly reasonable that he'd want as few people as possible to know that he knows. As for telling the player, well, he can't do this on his own, and there's no one he trusts in town. Meeting a stranger, he makes a rash decision and takes a risk, but it's the only chance he's got to get this resolved.
Like, it's just stupid, it's convoluted, and clearly the writers wanted you to walk in front of a dinosaur and have him peek his gun out and shoot them. Like, they had a goal in their mind, and then they worked toward that.
Well, yes, that's how most stories work. You have an idea or multiple ideas, and part of the process of storytelling is building bridges in between those ideas, or building up around them to justify those moments. This logic doesn't work here though, because he's acting as though confirming the evidence with Boone would somehow change its ultimate outcome when it doesn't. If we were to confirm the evidence with Boone, as he's saying should be done here, then why wouldn't you still be able to lure out the NPC in front of the dinosaur and still have him kill her? What's more impressive is that you missed the real problem with this quest to focus on something that isn't a problem, but saws one anyways due to your own overwhelming incredulity. The real problem is that it's fucking stupid that you can ask most NPCs to meet you in front of the dinosaur, and most will just go, in the middle of the night, without question.
And then you get to the strip, and you're told that it costs 2,000 caps to get in. A guy walks up to warn you about it, and you get to see somebody run up and get shot by the robots too, which is like, okay, like, really? The timing? Whatever. It's a video game.
Is the timing complaint that you just happen to see someone run up to the gate and get killed? Or is the timing complaint because you were just told about this and immediately see someone try it? Part of the point of New Vegas is that the strip is like nowhere else in the world, and people are desperate to get in. Being that old Ben hangs out near the gate, it makes sense that he'd warn you. The implication is that he warns most people who approach the gate. As for the dude running up, the timing is a bit convenient, sure, but it's more of an argument of something feeling too scripted, as opposed to jokey Bethesda humor or the game not being serious. And again, this is done to illustrate a point. The people are willing to risk their lives to get into the strip. I've also seen this guy respawn and die trying to get in again, so it is possible for it to happen more than once. One thing I'm noticing is that the old knight doesn't seem to be able to articulate his points well. Much of the video so far is him pointing at things and more or less citing his own incredulity as to why these things are a problem, rather than actually explaining what the problem is. I'm sorry, but your dismissive scoffing is not a compelling argument. Why is the timing of this bad? Why is the name Sunny Smiles a problem? Why is Boone's logic bad that potential Legion spies might find out what he knows and want to kill him? Throwing quotes around the word logic doesn't make his logic bad. You're an adult. Use your words.
As you keep going, you find a gang of Elvis impersonators, and people act like this isn't a joke because the game itself takes the faction seriously. That in and of itself is a joke.
Again, it really seems like this person has a very narrow set of expectations, and anytime something even slightly strays outside of that set of expectations, it is automatically silly and stupid and a joke and not to be taken seriously at all. This is a person incapable of seeing something out of the ordinary and taking it seriously, or reading it as having sincerity or anything other than a joke, regardless of how that thing is treated. I think the most damning thing here is just how blatantly it appears he either doesn't care about this topic, or how insanely dismissive he's being. Just look at what he said.
And people act like this isn't a joke because the game itself takes the faction seriously. That in and of itself is a joke.
Wouldn't the fact that the game takes it seriously be proof that it's not meant to be a joke? And apparently citing how the game handles its own content is also a joke, because this is an argument he wants to dismiss out of hand, and has no actual rebuttal for. He then takes a clip from one of my videos. What, you think Fallout is serious with a group of Elvis impersonators in the game? Yes, actually. See, in order to pretend that the kings are purely silly, stupid joke material, you have to ignore everything about them, from their quests to their role in the world to even their lore.
That a serious faction is a bunch of Elvis impersonators is goofy. It's silly, that's the intent. Clearly the writers, again, started from the premise of, we want a gang of Elvis impersonators because there are Elvis impersonators in Las Vegas, and I think that's funny. And then they worked from there to make a real faction. It's the juxtaposition of it is absurd, and it is kind of funny.
Do you have any actual counter-arguments to anything I said there? Repeatedly insisting that they're goofy just because you say so, just because you're utterly unable to comprehend anything outside of your expectations, does not make it so. This is the kind of person I was talking about when I made that video. The kinds of people who are either unable, or absolutely refuse to take things seriously, and essentially cite their own lack of care or comprehension as reasons or explanations for why something is silly or stupid. And how do you know that the intent is that it's supposed to be goofy and silly? He doesn't cite any interviews, he just insists that this must be the case. That the writers want a group of Elvis impersonators because those exist in Las Vegas, and therefore that just means it would automatically be funny. He apparently didn't stop to think that this was a choice made not because it was funny, but because it makes sense, because this is a thing people do in real life. One of the really great things about New Vegas is that the developers actually went and visited many of the locations that appear in the game, and tried to get them as accurate as possible, including Goodsprings. It makes sense that setting a game in a place that has Elvis impersonators in real life, you would include them in the game. San Andreas did this as well. For New Vegas, they could have left them out, or they could have treated them like a silly, stupid joke, a subject of mockery and derision, but instead they decided to incorporate them into the world in a way that makes sense. They took a real-life concept and didn't treat it like a joke, but with sincerity and respect to tell a story in earnest, something Bethesda Fallout sorely lacks. Your inability to understand or accept this is neither the game's fault nor my own. This is squarely a you problem. It's also worth giving special attention to the fact that he just invents a story whole cloth as to how the kings were created by the developers, with no basis besides his own assumptions, and this is done to support his own point that they're meant to be a joke. I suppose you can win any argument or debate by just inventing information out of thin air to support your point, in which case I can do that too. Todd Howard said I was correct and based in my video. No, I don't have any proof of this, and yes, I did just make it up, but it's true because I said so, therefore everything I said in my video is correct. See what an awful fucking argument that is? Interesting to note too, that he cut a rather large section of my video that explains much of what I was talking about too. Here's the full section. What, you think Fallout is serious with a group of Elvis impersonators in the game? Yes, actually. See, in order to pretend that the kings are purely silly, stupid joke material, you have to ignore everything about them, from their quests to their role in the world to even their lore. Fallout is a post-apocalypse setting. As such, it makes total sense that people unaware of what life was like before the apocalypse would have strange views of the pre-war world. It makes sense that a bunch of tribals might find a school of impersonation and take it as though the person it's based on was worshipped by people, and thus strive to emulate him as a result. This is not that far-fetched, especially considering what real people believe in real life. Further, no part of the game itself treats them as a joke, or as though they're not a serious group. They're not comedic relief, they're not silly, goofy, wacky jokesters, nothing of the sort. They're played totally straight. This is a faction that was written with sincerity. In fact, they're involved in arguably one of the best quests in the game, in which you investigate the senseless beating of some friends of the leader of the kings, and learn that it was some NCR soldiers who did it, as a result of growing tension between the kings and the NCR, primarily as a result of the king's second-in-command Pacer, agitating them and rebuking their attempts at diplomacy and not telling the king. Every step of the way this is treated as earnest storytelling, and not silly and stupid. How can anyone in good faith see this and claim that the series is silly and stupid because of the inclusion of a group like this? The old knight either couldn't understand what was being said there, or he's being disingenuous and ignoring the actual arguments being made, because they're inconvenient to the point he's trying to make. I explained in detail why they're not a joke, and how you'd have to ignore all the context surrounding them to treat them like a joke, and his response is to ignore all the context surrounding them to insist that they're a joke. Just to make clear, this is the kind of thing you have to deal with frequently when criticizing Bethesda Fallout. If you criticize Bethesda Fallout in any capacity, then you're automatically a toxic New Vegas Obsidian fanboy, but Bethesda fans can spew ignorant and idiotic shit like this constantly and they're perfectly fine. They can cut important context out of your argument to undermine it, and it's perfectly fine. Something I'd get fucking roasted for if I did it to someone else. Remember, fans of New Vegas and the classic games are always in the wrong, and Bethesda fans are always in the right.
But if you came into it like me expecting this very serious game with masterful writing, this is all just hurting the believability of the game, it's unimmersive, it's hurting the verisimilitude, and it made me have a bad experience.
I mean, really, this just says more about you than anything else. Most normal people are able to see something like this and not view it as a purely surface level thing as you are. This is literally the whole judging a book by its cover thing that most people learn when they're 5 years old. The old knight sees an Elvis impersonator and writes it off as being silly and stupid. He doesn't actually pay attention to the writing behind it, or the role they play within the world, or even an explanation for why they exist. He just sees the costume, the surface level superficial aspect of them, and categorizes them as a joke and doesn't think about it any more deeply than that. If we were to swap out their costumes for something more mundane, and strip out the Elvis lore and way of speaking, but keep the rest of the writing the same, the story told with them, their role in the world and so forth, he almost certainly wouldn't see them as a joke, but because it is a bit unusual, it gets written off. It speaks to how much of a shallow and quite frankly unintelligent person he is, that he sees the Kings, and his takeaway is that they're a stupid immersion-ruining joke. The faction is built from the ground up to reference something in the real world, while still making them a unique and interesting faction in their own right, in a way that makes sense within the world we see. While Lonesome Road isn't about the Kings in any way, a big theme of that DLC is people taking symbols, mostly old world symbols, without any understanding of what they mean, because it's a very human thing to do to emulate someone or something you think was good or deserved respect. This is literally part of the lore of the Kings. They were a tribe that found the school of impersonation, and seeing how the old world seemingly worshipped Elvis, they saw him as someone to emulate. They strive to be like him, and it's never treated like a punchline to a joke, because quite simply, it's not intended as a joke. I think it's really interesting as a concept, and it makes sense given the post-apocalypse nature of the world, that a tribe would find a school of impersonation and view it in this way. That their lack of understanding or knowledge of the old world makes them view a musician as someone to worship. Once again, to treat the Kings as anything other than an earnest and sincere part of the world, to treat them like nothing more than a joke, requires you to ignore practically everything about them, because they are literally made to be immersive. I'm also fairly certain that he doesn't know what verisimilitude even means. It's the appearance of being true or real, and the Kings absolutely seem like something that could possibly exist within the post-apocalypse, especially in Fallout's version of our world. Remember that the phrase cargo cult exists because the native people in the Pacific Islands who didn't know any better built mock airstrips after World War II, thinking that by doing so, the airplanes bringing supplies would return. This is a real thing, and yet, I get the impression if such a thing were included in a game, the old knight would scoff at it as being silly.
Not to mention the crashes and the poor gameplay.
New Vegas crashing constantly is cited as a problem by Bethesda fans, and I'm at the point of feeling this problem is way overblown. Now it is a game made in Bethesda's engine, it is going to have crashes, that's just the nature of the beast. Morrowind crashes, Oblivion crashes, Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and Starfield all crash. But as someone who has played a lot of New Vegas, completely unmodded mind you, my crashes were few and far between, and this is across 3 or 4 different computers over the years. I don't know why New Vegas is singled out as being a problem in this regard, besides the fact that Bethesda fans are likely looking for an easy win, and the game did notoriously crash a lot on launch, and this is a frequently repeated criticism. That was 15 years ago now. Let it go. As for his complaint about the poor gameplay, While he provides no actual argument for why the gameplay is bad, and considering the quality of his criticism so far, I'm just going to dismiss this complaint out of hand. There's no reason for me to take such a complaint seriously if he's going to fail to back it up at all.
And, every time you enter a casino, they want to take your guns. And obviously, if you're anything like me, you just kill everyone. And the game's too easy, so it doesn't matter. You're just able to kill everyone because they're really weak. And as long as you put points in guns, which is nothing stopping you from doing that, you can just go kill Caesar as long as you, have some ammo and you have some stim packs.
When playing a game all about its world and story, a game about choice and consequences, a game about immersing yourself within the world, your gut reaction to being slightly inconvenienced is to just go on a killing spree? I mean, really, what more proof is needed that you weren't engaging with this game in good faith at all, and weren't taking it seriously in the slightest? What kind of person sets out to experience a story and just goes full murder hobo? Why should anyone take anything you've got to say about this game seriously, if you're just going to go in and not actually engage with the content at all, and treat it as though it's all stupid due to your own ignorance?
The only real challenge to deal with was all the damn invisible walls. But that's a different complaint.
What invisible walls are you talking about? Are you trying to get out of bounds? Because if so, yeah, no shit, there's invisible walls.
I went back and played it off stream by myself with lower expectations and different expectations, and I played it more like a video game. I wasn't analyzing the writing so much.
I'll be honest, this one kind of blindsided me. It's the kind of thing you hear, and it is so monumentally, egregiously stupid that you're just stunned into silence for a bit. You hear this ridiculous bullshit, and the only rational response is,
"We're not gonna make it, are we?" People, I mean.
how the fuck can you say you were analyzing the writing when you outright dismissed and ignored basically everything you've mentioned so far? How can you say you were analyzing the writing when barely just a few seconds ago, you said you started killing everyone because they tried taking your guns in the casino? See, my main focus on this channel is analyzing writing. So far mostly of games, but I also cover movies and TV shows as well. My process is to go through as much of the content as I can, to find out as much information as possible, and to answer as many questions as I may have. I need to check to see if there's a reasonable explanation for something I might have a problem with. Hell, half the time I need to check if there's even an explanation at all. This process, by its nature, requires me to engage with the media I'm covering with the utmost attention. I view it as a non-negotiable requirement for myself to be thorough and consider alternatives. I can't see something I think is stupid and just scoff and dismiss it as stupid. I actually have to explore the details behind it. That's not to say I don't miss things or don't make mistakes, everyone does. But a common problem with low-effort analysis, like what the old knight is apparently doing here in his video, is people starting with their conclusions and working backwards from there, or running purely off their first impressions and not wanting to change it much, or simply poor research. Or even making shit up to support his point like the old knight did earlier with the creation of the kings. The old knight sees the kings and repeatedly insists that they're a joke because they're Elvis impersonators, but he can't elaborate on why that makes it a joke. He can't elaborate on why that's a bad thing, and he can't elaborate on why it damaged or ruined his impression of the game. The kings being Elvis impersonators make them a joke because a group of people impersonating Elvis is unusual. It's a joke not meant to be taken seriously, despite every aspect of the game treating them seriously, purely because he insists that it must be a joke because it's a bit weird. He has no desire to look beyond his surface-level first impressions and assumptions. He has no interest in actually exploring what the game has to offer. He has no interest in hearing what the game has got to say. He has no intent to go beyond the absolute bare minimum to claim he played the game and gave it a chance. He sees something unusual, categorizes it as silly, and never thinks any deeper about it than that. That is, the old knight analyzing writing. When I see the kings and, experience what content they've got to offer without being reductive or dismissive, I see a deep and nuanced faction. An interesting addition to the world that doesn't undermine it in stupid ways. I see a faction written in earnest with sincerity. This isn't a superpower I have, it's the basic ability that people have to look beyond surface level appearances and actually take in and understand the actual substantive content for what it is, as well as the lore and world building behind the faction. As I said in my other video, the part that the old knight conveniently cut out and ignored, the kings are fully justified to exist within this world and make sense as a faction. They're never treated as a joke, they're never treated as though they're unimportant or exist purely to laugh at. They're an integrated part of the world. No amount of derision or incredulous scoffing will change that fact. Being that I am highly critical of how the tone of Fallout is handled, especially in relation to the silly, stupid aspects of Bethesda Fallout, I think a comparison is necessary, because I have called certain aspects about them silly and stupid, and I feel like people like the old knight here would be unable to tell the difference between what he does and what I do. In Fallout 3, there's a character and related quest that I think is silly and stupid, and damaging to the tone of Fallout. That character is Sierra Petrovita, and the quest is the Nuka Cola Challenge. This is a character obsessed with Nuka Cola. She collects merchandise of it, and she stays in her home all day, every day, drinking Nuka Cola, finding ways to cook with Nuka Cola, admiring her collection, and waiting for someone to come by for her to show off her collection too. While people like this do exist, having a functioning society is a bit of a barrier to being able to do this. She lives in the post-apocalypse. There is no functioning society. Nuka Cola and its merchandise is not being made still. There are no advertisements playing on the radio, and televisions don't work anymore, and even if they did, there's no channels to watch because there's no one to operate such things anymore, so there's no advertisements being seen that way. One's exposure to Nuka Cola as a brand in the post-apocalypse is going to be exceptionally limited. All you've got are the drinks themselves when you happen to find them, and what billboard and poster advertisements you might see in the world, assuming you do any traveling. One's ability to become a die-hard Nuka Cola superfan should be next to impossible within this world. More importantly than that, however, is the fact that Fallout 3 is telling the story of a water crisis. Barely anyone has access to clean water. No one is growing food outside of Rivet City, which is incapable of supplying the entire Wasteland. Sierra Petrovita lives in a settlement that has a total population of 2 people. Her, and the guy lusting after her brain-dead ass. They do nothing to actually ensure their own survival in this world. They have no water source, they grow no food, they don't have anything to trade. They don't do anything at all. There's no depth and nuance to these characters. There is no worthwhile story told with them. This quest and its characters have no substance. It's purely a dumb gimmicky part of the game, purely for the sake of it. This is damaging to the tone and world, because you have this silly goofy nonsense that runs in complete opposition to what we're told and shown about this world. These people should not be able to survive as they're presented to us. The game breaks its own logic to allow them to exist, to have this dumb, pointless, gimmicky character that doesn't contribute to the world or story in any way. No thought was put into how this would affect the world or whether or not it makes sense to exist within this world, or anything of the sort. Unlike the old knight, I can actually explain why this is silly and stupid, rather than just insisting that it is.
I didn't care that there was a guy who thought he was a ghoul and how ridiculous that is. I just laughed at the ghouls shooting up their rocket and going to the moon.
You think it's ridiculous that a man is suffering from a neurotic delusion? Like, yeah, there's definitely a bit of a comedic angle to it with the subversion of hearing him on the intercom and assuming he's a ghoul, just to see he's actually a normal human, but it's still handled well and clearly isn't meant to be a shallow joke given the fact he actually has a bit of a character arc, and it's played straight after that first meeting. It makes sense that people would have weird delusions in the post-apocalypse. Going by this guy's logic, because something is out of the ordinary like this and that makes it a joke to him, you can never really tell a story about a character suffering from delusions or mental illness, because people like this will see it as nothing more than a ridiculous joke. Also, the ghouls weren't going to the moon. It's really fucking weird how many people genuinely think they go to space. It really goes to show how many people just didn't pay attention and made assumptions because they used rockets. What's especially weird is that someone who claimed to be analyzing the story got this detail so painfully fucking wrong. This is someone who is utterly incapable of story analysis, as proven by his absurdly shallow view of the Kings, by getting facts like this wrong, and by being a murder hobo.
It was funny, and I accepted that it was not serious and that I could be entertained by it, and I did actually really love it.
So I've gotta ask, is this whole thing a binary to you? So if you see something unusual, it's automatically silly and not serious at all? Are you completely unable to compartmentalize that many elements go into writing and that the story could have jokes, lighthearted moments, and even silly aspects to it, while overall remaining fairly serious? I get the impression that the old knight is the kind of person who would see a joke in a horror movie, or in an otherwise dead serious war movie, and the switch would just get flipped in his head, and he'd view the whole thing as silly. Because it really seems from his reactions, from his pathetic excuse for analysis, from what he's saying in this video so far, that he has no ability to take anything even remotely out of the ordinary as anything but a stupid silly joke. All I've got to work with here is his video. I'm not looking at anything else on his channel, because the point of a video is to explain your points and arguments within that video. If he's failing to make his arguments properly, that's his problem. But from what I've seen of his video so far, approximately a quarter of his video, he's either unable to actually look at what the content is, or he's unable to explain what his problems are, or he's simply not taking it seriously and not actually engaging with the content. Again, all the answers here reflect poorly on him, but that's what I've got to work with based on this awful video.
Okay, now that we had that very long aside, now let's get back to the point of this video.
Another pro tip. When making a video, try not to go on massive unrelated tangents, especially within like the first minute or two of your video. The point of your video is that you think Fallout fans are crazy, and yet you've spent approximately a quarter of your video proving you're incompetent when it comes to basic analysis. None of this is relevant at the moment. Should any of this become relevant later in the video, bring these examples up then. Because right now I'm about 25% through a video, and you've said nothing about the actual topic, aside from the opening statement that Fallout fans are crazy. Now I do need to make a bit of a note of this next section before starting it. He clips another person's video, and for some reason cuts it mid-sentence, and it just comes across as really bizarre and lazy editing.
Why everybody else who talks about Fallout is a fucking psychopath.
Take it easy, it's just Fallout New Vegas.
Bitches be out here thinking that LARPing as some legionary on the internet and sucking Obsidian's dick is gonna save that Fallout fandom.
No,
Dude, you're not nailing.
It's funny because I actually agree a lot with what this guy's video is talking about, but his complaint is that, yeah, all of the content creators around Fallout are insane, or they're just reading a wiki or reading a terminal from a game. So they're just reading text from the game to you, so it's really boring. But he even makes this point in the most insane way possible. I don't know if it's just Zoomer brain, but there's meme after meme, and I understand about 9% of them, so it's just total madness.
Okay, Grandpa, let me explain to you what an internet shitpost is. This guy might actually have severe autism. When he inevitably responds to this video, he'll probably include a comment about how he isn't a grandfather. Creetosis calls me a grandpa in this video, but I am not a grandfather. Like, it's so fucking bizarre to see someone take an obvious shitpost as being anything other than the spastic nonsense it's clearly meant to be. It'd be like watching a YouTube poop and complaining that the story makes no sense or that the spliced dialogue sounds funny. He's also, again, failing to explain himself properly here. He says Fallout content creators are insane, or they're reading a wiki or terminals from the game and that's boring. He still fails to elaborate on why they're insane, with his only actual citation being a shitpost he agrees with, and he apparently doesn't understand what lore videos are, where people who go through the game and use terminal entries and stuff to explain the lore of the world. Like, the way he says it here, you'd think people just make videos where they do literally nothing but read terminal entries, and because there's no epic Subway Surfer gameplay on the side, that's boring. This also appears to have no relevance to anything, it's just kinda randomly thrown in. This very much just seems like a stream of consciousness video, where he has a vague idea in mind of what he wants to talk about, and rather than properly scripting a video, he's just going off the cuff and it just turns into a complete mess. Some people can do this well, and some can't. I know I can't, which is why I script every video I make. It gives me the time to find all the citations I need and to get things accurate, while also trimming or avoiding the shit that is totally unnecessary to the point being made.
Yeah, he's got a point about Obsidian fanboys. They had 18 months. That doesn't mean their game should have as many bugs as it does.
I mean, it's just a simple fact that the less time you've got to make a game, the less you can do with it. With as big a scope as New Vegas has, with as much choice as it has, with as much sheer content that it has, there's only so much they could realistically do in this short time span, and many bugs slip through as a result. New Vegas, despite its short development time, is no more buggy than your average Bethesda game.
I know people are going to hate me for saying this, but Warcraft 3 The Frozen Throne, that's an expansion pack. That took him 9 months to make. And you could say New Vegas is a full game. It's not an expansion pack. Really? It looks a lot like Fallout 3. I'm not even going to do a whole thing where I do them side by side, but they look the fucking same.
New Vegas is not an expansion pack. This is one of those arguments that comes up from time to time, and it's one I've never liked. Back when Left 4 Dead 2 was announced, there was a full-on boycott of the game, because people thought it should have been an expansion as opposed to a full-on game. This is despite the fact that the game had a comparable amount of content to the original Left 4 Dead. There were several full campaigns, new weapons, melee weapons, new infected, and new characters. Like it or not, Left 4 Dead 2 was a full-on game, with all the associated development requirements that entails, aside from the base version of the engine and mechanics, and some assets being carried over from the original. New Vegas is much the same case. The Old Knight says that New Vegas looks a lot like Fallout 3, even saying he's not going to do the side-by-side, but they really look similar, as though he's the first person to realize this. Everyone knows that New Vegas was built in the same version of the engine and shares some of the assets. This is common knowledge. Saying this in 2025, 15 years after the game was released, is so beyond inane and pointless. Just get to the fucking point that they use the same version of the engine and some of the assets.
They didn't make a game from scratch. They took Fallout 3 and then built upon that. They had 18 months when they had a base game to start with.
Yes and no. They were building upon a base game, but also still creating a full game world, story, lore, and characters essentially from scratch. Like yeah, the skill system and perks and experience and the shooting mechanics were there, but all that had to be tweaked and changed. Having a base to work from absolutely reduces workload, but he's acting as though what they did here wasn't already a monumental task to get done in the time they had. Remember, the development of Fallout 3 started in 2004, and while it was a small team until Oblivion was completed, the game still took 4 years to make, and had a fraction of the substantive main story and side quest content that New Vegas ultimately had. Fact of the matter is that Obsidian made a genuinely impressive amount of content for the game given the development time they had. From everything I've seen and heard about the game's development, it really does seem as though they did as much as they could with the time they had. I absolutely believe games shouldn't be released in a broken state, but Obsidian should have also been given more time. Even with a head start with the engine and some assets, creating what they did in the time they did is still a monumental task.
Other games don't get that, and they take, 2 to 3 years? So doing it a little bit faster when other games are building up from a lot less than they started with. And on top of that, the things they decided to change. They put a bunch of effort in changing the gun noises.
Actually, a fair amount of games do. Fallout 2 was built upon Fallout 1. Majora's Mask was built upon Ocarina of Time, and even that game had an R-Wing from Star Fox in it as an unused enemy that was likely done for testing purposes. Many Valve games share assets between various games. You can find many props, textures, and objects shared between Counter-Strike Source, Half-Life 2, and Left 4 Dead. Most aren't as obvious or blatant as with these examples or with Fallout 3 and New Vegas, but many modern games are built on the foundation of previous entries, and assets get reused all the time. Development time also varies widely depending on the type of game being made and the scale. Remember, New Vegas is building a full-on world space approximately the same size as that of Fallout 3, with many more quests. This isn't a minuscule area like Point Lookout as compared to Fallout 3. As for the example of the Frozen Throne expansion for Warcraft 3 earlier, the difference is the vast majority of the assets in the expansion are reused, and it's much less intensive in terms of content development as compared to a full-on open-world game. Remember that open-world games, especially at the level of detail these games tend to have, where you can enter nearly every building you can see, are notoriously one of the more difficult kinds of games to make, to the point that Bethesda essentially had no real competition doing anything similar for over a decade. He also mentions that they spent time changing the gun sounds as if that's supposed to mean anything, or is somehow a problem or ridiculous. The Old Knight is really bad at explaining himself. He just throws stuff like this out there, expects you to read his mind to understand why he thinks it's bad. What if they just thought the gun sounds were bad, or could have been better than what was there? Why would them changing the gun sounds be a bad thing, unless it's in some way a downgrade? This is such a pointless and inane criticism to make.
I don't even want to get into it.
Then why bring it up? This is your video. You control what goes into it.
I love Fallout New Vegas, so I feel stupid for criticizing it.
This is another very telling statement. He feels stupid for criticizing something he likes. What an insane self-own, and I bet he doesn't have the capacity to understand why this is a self-own. You shouldn't feel stupid for criticizing something you like. You shouldn't feel stupid for criticizing New Vegas. You should feel stupid for the blatantly idiotic way in which you're criticizing it.
But the people who really ride Obsidian's dick and praise Fallout New Vegas for being the best game ever, they're full of shit.
The matter is that even Bethesda fans want things to get better, and it serves absolutely fucking nobody to be pushing this historical revisionism that is only gonna lead things to get worse. If you are legitimately a fan of the games, regardless of which iterations of the games that is, you will actually shut the fuck up with this absolute bullshit.
That is the second YouTube video that I've seen talking about how serious of a franchise Fallout is and how everyone is an idiot if they think otherwise.
I would like to thank The Old Knight for being such a good example of why these videos are necessary, and why more videos like them should be made. I implore anyone watching this video who cares about Fallout to make videos fighting back against the idea that Fallout is a silly, wacky, stupid setting.
The first one was Creetosis, and he seemed to just completely strawman the entire point. Enclave Emily at least showed what other people said on screen, that people think that Fallout has always been partly a dark comedy, which is obvious.
Admittedly, I should have shared more proof that this sentiment is common. I did have the screen caps and got lazy and didn't include them while editing, so here they are now for you to see. There's a couple tweets in there that are duplicates. I didn't take these screenshots myself, they were shared with me or I got them off of Twitter. This is also completely disregarding the countless times I've received similar comments on my own videos over the past several years. And I didn't cap those because YouTube's comment search system is barely functional and never returns all the results that should come up from such a search. It used to work before, but they changed it like, I want to say about 4 years ago, I think? But while I'm at it, what I will include is people making these arguments in the comments section of the very video arguing against them in the first place. Nothing says utterly brain dead, like repeating the exact arguments being countered, as if repeating the same bullshit is just going to be effective in any way. At least you're not that stupid, Old Knight.
Yes, there are serious moments. There's slavery, there's crucifixion, there's dark themes all over. But there's also a holy hand grenade. There's a Pinky in the Brain reference in Fallout 2. There's a moment in Fallout New Vegas, which is a game that these guys love so much, where you get a lobotomy, and then you talk to a robot with your brain. You're talking to your own brain, and you don't have a brain.
Never mind, I take it back. You are that stupid. I don't know why other morons think this is in any way a valid argument, but it's not. Listing off a bunch of examples in isolation, devoid of any context of there being silly things within the franchise, is not a compelling argument because this can be done with any series that has some jokes in it, or moments of levity. Listing all that shit doesn't mean the whole thing is silly. This isn't Austin Powers where everything is serving some kind of joke or gag. We're talking a setting where the split between serious content and silly jokes is approximately 80-20 at absolute most. The way the Old Knight and people like him treat it, you'd think it was a 50-50 split, or even a 40-60 split, with 40 being serious and 60 being silly joke content. Fact of the matter is that the tone is mostly serious. The vast majority of the content in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas is earnest and sincere storytelling, and having some levity or comic relief or pop culture references doesn't change that. This is no different than the people who claim Star Wars is an unserious franchise because a stormtrooper bumped his head in the first movie. It's the exact same kind of mentality of excusing terrible writing and silly bullshit that is damaging to the series by pointing at vaguely similar aspects, but ignoring all the actual context, substance, and the difference between both examples. It's totally fine for the Fallout show to be completely retarded because there was a robot named Fisto in New Vegas. It honestly comes across as a really disingenuous argument, as though people are being intentionally obtuse so as to not engage with the actual criticism, because I feel people should be smart enough to tell the difference between the Nuka-Cola Challenge or Nuka World and something like the Kings or Come Fly With Me. The reason this narrative about Fallout being silly is a problem is because people like this constantly hype up the silly aspects or jokes, or misrepresent parts of the games like the Kings to be utterly unserious jokes and portray it as being far more silly than it actually is. Then you've got these tweets I showed earlier. We never had a serious story told in the Fallout setting. When has Fallout ever been serious? Even the original 2 games had a crazy amount of jokes in them. The series is supposed to be a wacky take on the nuclear apocalypse, lol. We have 100 shows/games on the serious side, Stalker, Metro, so it's nice Fallout is mostly just funny. People seriously genuinely act as though Fallout is nothing but a stupid goofball comedy series when it never was. That's the problem. I've received comments like this for years, anytime I criticize aspects of Bethesda's Fallout games for being ridiculous and stupid, and I get utter retards like the Old Knight pointing at Easter eggs, pop culture references, and the odd joke, as though that somehow negates the criticism of Bethesda, as if a handful of references somehow outweighs the majority of the substantive content in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas.
I don't even need to talk about the wacky stuff when you pick that one trait, Wild Wasteland or whatever.
Are you retarded? Sorry, that's insensitive. Let me try that again. Are you retarded? This is one of the things I had heard from his video that made me want to cover it. The fact he even cites this as an argument in favor of the silliness of New Vegas is proof enough this utter denthead is about as intelligent as a retarded turnip, and that's the reason I'm not even trying to appeal to him in these arguments. Like I said at the start, this is the kind of person that will never be convinced by actual arguments because it genuinely seems like he struggles with basic logic. Remember, in my video, I said you'd have to ignore all the context and lore, and how the kings are treated within the game to act as though they're nothing more than a joke, and the old knight's response was to ignore all the context and lore to treat them like nothing more than a joke. And even go so far to say that it's a joke that people don't treat this like a joke because the game treats them seriously. The whole point of Wild Wasteland was to specifically section away the silliest things that could potentially ruin the tone of the game for people. The stuff that can't be justified within the lore, or stuff that's just straight up a blatant pop culture reference with no connection to the world or lore. See, after Fallout 2, there was a lot of people unhappy with how many pop culture references there were, and some jokey aspects it had. People rightfully felt that it damaged the tone of the game. Wild Wasteland was a nice compromise on this where you could get the intended tone, but it also allowed the developers to make the jokes and references they wanted without them being intrusive to the experience. If you wanted some jokes and references, then it was available as an option for you to enable. I don't know how you could possibly be more blatant in saying the tone is important to the developers than to specifically isolate the more out there jokes to be something you've got to go out of your way to enable.
You know, that trait is not in Diablo 1. In Diablo 1, you can't pick a trait to say, hey, I want Diablo to make a joke to me.
What does Diablo have to do with this conversation? How does Diablo not having a similar trait mean anything to this conversation? He does bring up what the creator of Diablo felt about jokes being put into the sequel, but he includes a big long section here that's completely unnecessary to make the point.
That's a great video by Darklore Dash, and it highlights what happens when one creator switches to another. Diablo 1 was a serious game with one tiny Easter egg, but Hellfire added a whole bunch of silliness, a guy in a cow suit, and more, and the original creators hated it. That's not the case with Fallout. I mean, maybe Tim Kaine hated Fallout 2, but Fallout 2 is included in the games that people love.
Fallout 2 is included among the games considered to be the good Fallout games by many fans, because Fallout 2 has a lot of really good writing and world building in it. You know what else people say about Fallout 2? You know what fans of Fallout 2 say? You know what I say about Fallout 2, it being my favorite game in the franchise? That they went overboard with the jokes and pop culture references. That they do absolutely damage the tone. That I didn't need to see the Monty Python bridge encounter a dozen times on my first playthrough. This is part of why I said earlier that it was a self-own for him to say he feels stupid for criticizing New Vegas. He seemingly can't comprehend that you can love something and be critical of its major shortcomings as well. That you can't criticize something you love. He seems to treat it as though if you like something, you have to accept it as a full package. That by liking Fallout 2, you can't criticize it for damaging the tone, and you can't criticize Bethesda for making this issue so much worse. It's a common fallacy made in an attempt to discredit someone's arguments without actually addressing those arguments, or in an attempt to drag down the thing people like to the same level as the thing being criticized. In this instance, Fallout 2 to Bethesda Fallout.
And by people, I mean these weird YouTubers. Fallout New Vegas is included as one of the good games. And so these people making these Fallout was never serious videos, pretending that the tone of Fallout changed so dramatically going from Fallout 2 to 3, or from 3 to 4, or from 4 to the TV show.
The tone of Fallout has changed dramatically. This is an objective fact. Fallout 1 was a dead serious game, with rare jokes or Easter eggs. Fallout 2 is still a dark and serious game, but less so due to the abundance of jokes and references. In fact, despite the jokes still being a relatively small part of the game, they still heavily impacted the tone of the game, to the point it was a problem for many players. In fact, it's worth mentioning too, that the severity of the problem is vastly overblown by people like the old knight here, as a way to excuse what Bethesda's doing. I mean, he just did it.
And so these people making these Fallout was never serious videos, pretending that the tone of Fallout changed so dramatically going from Fallout 2 to 3, or from 3 to 4, or from 4 to the TV show.
I know someone will inevitably take issue with the fact I'm both saying it was a big problem, but also overblown. Both things can be true, however. Yes, too many jokes and Easter eggs and pop culture references can absolutely cause issues, and they do in Fallout 2. But simultaneously, people act as though Fallout 2 is a wacky, goofy comedy through and through. People overblow how bad it was to excuse Bethesda making it far worse. Remember, we're talking about approximately a 20-80 split at most of goofy joke nonsense versus serious content. Yes, that can be enough to damage the tone, and yes, people overblow it to make it sound so much worse than it is. It speaks to a level of ignorance to claim there wasn't a dramatic shift in tone from 2 to 3, or from 3 to 4, or from 4 to the show when it's clear as day that there's been a massive tone shift. We're also talking about someone who wrote off the Kings as nothing more than a joke, so at least this fits his MO of utter brainlessness. This is also why I say I'll never be able to convince this guy and I'm not going to waste my time trying. This is a person not willing to engage in good faith. This is someone who thinks a reasonable and rational explanation in defense of the Kings is a joke in and of itself. You can't actually have a conversation with someone who is going to write off arguments like that and treat it like nothing more than a subject of mockery and derision. That said, I'm still making the counter-arguments here for everyone else, and for the sake of just making the argument to have it out there. This serves as a good continuation of that original video, because it dives into the exact problem discussed in that video. The old knight cited the fact I failed to provide evidence of people thinking this, but then he went and jumped on that grenade and made himself the evidence of this very sentiment that I was arguing against in the first place. If nothing else, I do appreciate someone being a willing example of such a lack of basic critical thinking skills. The thing about most of the silly aspects in Fallout 2 is that they were largely confined to random encounters. Those clearly weren't meant to be a part of the narrative or world building. They were largely just amusing things the developer tossed into the random encounter table. Fallout 1 had these as well, with the Doctor Who TARDIS encounter, the giant dinosaur footprint, and the crashed UFO. On that note, one of the greatest examples of the tone shift is with the aliens. In Fallout 1, it was nothing more than a joke encounter, an Easter egg. In Fallout 3, they're fully canonized as part of the lore, and you have big Fallout YouTubers citing them as part of the lore and speculating on their involvement in the world and how they influence events and so forth. The joke Easter egg in the original is often cited as proof that aliens were part of the canon since the start. People cite the talking Deathclaws as a silly thing in Fallout 2, yet ignore their actual place in the world and their story. It's just automatically silly and stupid because talking animals. Arguably, the worst thing Fallout 2 did in this regard was a Scientology parody in The Hubologist, which was such an unsubtle joke that it borders on being cringeworthy. But in Fallout 3, you have people dressed as superheroes hamming it up in the streets. You've got a town built around a nuke. You've got a cult of people who worship the idea of getting vaporized by the nuke. You've got a town of cannibals who act like the war and apocalypse hasn't even happened. You've got a town of immortal children. You've got a cult of people who act like and call themselves vampires. You've got a dipshit obsessed with Nuka-Cola, and all of this is on top of a world that very generally doesn't feel like it takes itself seriously in any capacity. Or even in the serious moments, it feels like the characters are going through the motions as opposed to helping reinforce the tone, and yet all of that is built on top of a world that basically has no world building, where hardly anything in the world is justified, and what explanation or lore there is to try to justify those things is poorly written garbage. There is no cohesion to the world. Keep in mind too, many of the examples I just listed off aren't one-off Easter eggs or references, but major content within the game. Fallout 3 has only 17 side quests, and a good chunk of those are silly, stupid, or wacky in some way. A big part of the problem, too, is in the fact it appears Bethesda themselves don't take the setting seriously at all. And it feels like one big playground for them to do all their nonsense wacky garbage in. It's essentially become a dumping ground for all their unfunny jokes and references, with Fallout 4 being a particularly horrendous example. All throughout Fallout 3 and 4, it frequently feels like most people aren't struggling to survive in any way, and the whole world in both games is incredibly shallow. I talk about this in my Fallout 3 analysis, but the fact that the main story is about a water crisis, that hardly anyone has any access to clean water, but also no one seems to care about it outside of 3 beggars and the player's father, is extremely heavily damaging to the tone. Rather than building a cohesive world, where everyone's daily survival is their biggest concern, you're off doing quests searching for a violin in a dungeon, you're getting costume freaks to stop fighting in the street, you're crippling and irradiating yourself for an utter moron stupid book project. There's few genuine attempts to tell a serious story in Fallout 3 that isn't undermined in some way. In the quest of those, you have a child run up to you, begging for help to save him from the monsters, to find his father, and you find out the whole town has been wiped out by fire-breathing ants, and you go through the trouble of finding the scientist behind this disaster, who turns out to be a complete cartoon character.
My experiments are of a complex nature and would take a scientist to explain. Oh wait, I'm a scientist. How marvelous.
As for Fallout 4, the whole game is a joke, barely takes itself seriously at all, and the main story is so undercooked that you're at risk of getting salmonella from consuming it. The world of Fallout 4, the Boston Commonwealth, does not have the dark, gritty feeling of the original games. It does not feel like a place where people are truly struggling, and the whole apocalypse feels like nothing more than a facade. Fallout itself is nothing more than a coat of paint, on top of what is little more than a shooting gallery. There's little substance to the world, and it feels like a place intended for a fun, consequence-free adventure, rather than the remnants of humanity trying to survive in the post-apocalypse. I'd argue the single worst piece of Fallout content, aside from the Amazon show, is the Nuka World expansion for Fallout 4, in which we're told that a brand of soda pop was significant enough to have a massive Disney-esque amusement park and was the most creatively bankrupt and over-the-top silly goofy thing that's been done with the franchise to date. In a post-apocalypse setting where bottle caps became currency, it just so happens that a brand of pop became so big that they made their park mascot a bottle cap. I said this in the final part of my Fallout 4 analysis, and I'll say it here too. There isn't even a hint of something this fucking stupid existing in the original games. Not because Nuka World didn't even exist as a concept yet, but because the writing, world building, and tone set up a world in which something this mind-numbingly fucking retarded wouldn't exist. Then of course we've got the Amazon show, full of its abysmal writing from start to finish, like spamming oldies at you the entire time, with no consistency of tone, and constant dumb jokes, like the architect of the nuclear apocalypse being a brain in a Roomba, and is constantly treated like a joke. Or Lucy's execution in Vault 4, where the Overseer is seemingly preparing to cut her head off with a sword, only to lamely saw away at her bindings with it, so she can be expelled to the surface, and he expects her to die immediately on the surface, yet gives her supplies, and somehow forgets that they have surface scavenging teams, and that Lucy came from the surface in the first place. To say the tone has changed from Fallout 2, to 3, to 4, to the show, is no less than an objective fact. Anyone who doesn't see this is blind or delusional. As a reminder, the vast majority of the substantive story content in even Fallout 2 is treated seriously and not like a joke. You can scream and cry about the Monty Python bridge encounter or a one-off Golden Globes boob joke as much as you want, but those brief moments don't outweigh the actual substantive content.
It is not the same as what David Brevik is talking about there. I totally understand a creator looking at their serious game and then the sequel made by someone else when you told them not to do it. They just made a ridiculous game anyway. That's infuriating. And I get it. I get the sentiment. These Fallout fans are pretending that's what happened to Fallout. That is not what happened to Fallout.
This is just flat out ignorance or cope at this point.
Unless you're arguing that's what happened from Fallout 1 to Fallout 2. And yeah, it's different people made Fallout 2 than the people who made Fallout 1. It was the same company. It wasn't Bethesda, and you can't use that narrative to shit on Bethesda, to hate Bethesda.
No one is using the changes from Fallout 1 to 2 as a narrative to hate Bethesda. To deny there have been further changes from 3 onwards is to deny reality outright. To deny that Bethesda has made the entire setting more goofy and silly since their acquisition of the IP is to deny objective reality. If someone keys my car, and someone else comes along and burns down my car, I'm absolutely going to hate the person who burned down my car. The fact that damage was done in Fallout 2 does not negate, excuse, or justify what Bethesda has done to the franchise since then. Especially since Bethesda keeps pushing the bounds of this with each new entry. This isn't them staying at the level it was at in Fallout 2, it's them completely bastardizing Fallout. It has become a complete clown show. It has become a parody of itself. Fallout 2 didn't do that, Bethesda did. For some reason, these insane Bethesda fans can't acknowledge that continuing to do something bad isn't justified by the fact that it was done before. They see these criticisms of what Bethesda has done, and rather than even attempting to understand why the criticism is being made in the first place, they seek to justify or excuse it. They think citing these examples from Fallout 2 gives Bethesda a free pass to keep doing idiotic bullshit. They don't care about the actual quality of the thing they're defending, they just want you to stop saying mean things about the slop they're consuming, and they think the fact that Fallout 2 is considered one of the good ones is somehow a killing blow to the argument against what Bethesda has been doing, despite the fact the silly aspects of Fallout 2 were one of the most heavily criticized parts of that game.
and so it's not a popular talking point. But ever since Fallout 2, which was literally 1998, Fallout has had a very jokey tone. It's still dark, there's still tons of dark themes, but it is partly a dark comedy. It's not a lie to say that there is silliness in Fallout.
No one is saying there's no silliness in Fallout. The problem is in people like you who see something a bit unusual and write it off as silly, then that being extrapolated to the entire series. The problem is in people who can't differentiate between Easter eggs and actual world building. People who can't tell the difference between a joke and actual lore. People who can't tell that something might appear unusual on the surface, and therefore silly at a glance, but miss the deeper substance of what is there. The whole point is that something having some jokes or silly moments in it does not turn the whole thing into a comedy, and does not make the whole thing silly. Again, special attention needs to be given to what is said here.
It's not a lie to say that there is silliness in Fallout.
The implication that arises from this statement is that those of us criticizing the ever-increasing silly aspect of Fallout are lying, and saying that Fallout never had anything silly in it. He has reframed the argument from being about the silly aspect being a small part of the good Fallout games, and Bethesda making it worse with each iteration, to it now being a criticism saying there was never anything silly in Fallout. Often in these discussions, people try to play these lame-ass word games and will call you a hypocrite for saying there are silly elements in the originals, while criticizing Bethesda for having silly elements, and I think that's part of the point the old knight is trying to make with this video. But the main difference obviously being the silly stuff was separate from the actual games for the most part for Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas. Just references and minor jokes to add some levity to the bleak world, whereas Bethesda's Fallout games are inundated with Marvel-tier humor in nearly every aspect. It bleeds into everything, and makes the world hard to take seriously. It's no longer a minor element to provide momentary respite from the somber setting, it is the setting now. The serious bleak tone is gone because of how pervasive it is. But retards will 100% claim that the two are exactly the same. To them, any humor equals a non-serious setting inherently.
In fact, you can go to the very first clip of this video. I'm killing a guy with a hatchet, and the way he dies and explodes, and the way people's body parts explode as you shoot them, even without any extra perks on, it's insane, it's ridiculous, it's absurd.
The very first clip of the video is him using a machete to attack Manny, and his head comes off. That is not the exploding body parts he's describing. Yes, that can happen in the game, but that's not the clip he describes. Regardless, he is referring to the over-the-top deaths that can happen, and they can be absurd and sometimes even funny. But again, I do not think this is a good example. Does adding hyper-violence and gore to any setting just automatically make the whole thing silly? Or is it simply an aspect of it that can be silly at times? I don't necessarily think that it does. I think it's more of a stylistic decision that can be amusing, but doesn't necessarily make it silly.
And there's a lot of moments throughout all of the games that are like that. I don't want to go through every example because I'm not a Fallout expert, but all the way since Fallout 2 there has been a ton of silliness.
At this point, this is essentially just a pointless statement. He's trying to say that it's fine, because aside from Fallout 1, all the games are super duper silly, even though that's just blatantly not the case. He has to ignore facts to make this statement. There's very much a difference between the silly things in 2 and New Vegas, as compared to the Bethesda titles. Constantly repeating the argument that all the games are super silly does not make it true.
That doesn't mean Fallout is bad, that doesn't mean Fallout can't be serious.
You ever see someone get involved in a discussion they clearly know very little about? They don't know or understand the arguments or the important information behind each side. They just kinda jump into the discussion and start bullshitting their way through, because for some reason they felt the need to say something about something they don't understand in the slightest. That's the impression I'm getting here. No one is saying silly aspects make Fallout bad. However, going overboard with them is damaging to the setting, lore, and tone. Yes, utter stupidity can absolutely ruin a story and world and make it worse. Again, Fallout 3, girl obsessed with a brand of pop and spends all her time thinking about it. Does nothing to keep herself alive in an extremely dangerous world during a water crisis. She just exists as a world-breaking gimmick because someone thought it would be funny. The Fallout show hardly treats any part of its world or story seriously, and even when it does, it's undermined and the tone damaged by things happening around it. As we're learning that Lucy's mother got nuked and is a ghoul, as we're learning that Cooper Howard's wife is Satan who wants to nuke the entire world, killing 99% of the population, we're constantly getting unfunny joke after unfunny joke with Bud, the brain on a Roomba.
It has tons of serious moments, it has tons of serious themes, and I think sincerity in video games is important and it has gone downhill, but these YouTubers are being dishonest when they paint things in this way.
Sincerity in games is important and it has gone downhill, but when you complain about it, you're being dishonest. When you care about it, you're being dishonest. He's calling those of us complaining about this very real problem dishonest, when he won't even attempt to understand the arguments being made or why. He just does the classic argument of saying the originals were silly, so it's fine that the Bethesda titles are silly, as if that silliness is to the same degree, quantity, or impact. As if there isn't a spectrum of what can be considered silly, and that each instance of it can be handled in different ways, and the ways in which Bethesda does it is extremely intrusive and damaging. But again, nuance means nothing to someone who won't engage, and just writes stuff off out of hand for superficial reasons.
But these YouTubers are being dishonest when they paint things in this way. In specifically the Fallout universe, in that franchise, Sincerity has gone down. Sincerity went way down from Fallout 1 to 2, and then it has hovered around that same level for all the rest of the games, except maybe a little dip with Fallout 76 in the show, but it's just that. It's a little dip. It's not a complete change of tone.
To anyone who actually knows anything about these games, that is such an insane statement to hear. Again, he's just denying reality to act like Fallout 3 and 4 are anything like 2 in regards to tone. Even in Fallout 2, I wouldn't say the sincerity went down much. Part of the problem here is that he seems to be conflating an issue of sincerity and an issue of silly nonsense. It's honestly an easy mistake to make, because the two can really go hand in hand sometimes. I suppose I'd argue that the issue of sincerity is generally down to how seriously the setting takes itself, and how the silly aspects are incorporated into the setting, and the impact that can have. It's a whole issue of Marvel humor, and the often cited jokes of, "He's right behind me, isn't he?" Or, "Well, that just happened." The problem with these kinds of jokes is that they are often done in a way that undermines the characters, the world, the obstacles, the threats, or other things within the world in some way that can be damaging to the experience or audience enjoyment in some way. For example, a lot of people hated how Thor was treated in Avengers Endgame, that rather than going on a character arc after failing to stop Thanos, the movie instead treats him like a joke early on, with him being a fat loser, yelling at children on Fortnite, and even a joke where they ask his opinion on something, and he doesn't respond or move, prompting one of the characters to ask if he's asleep, only for another character to say he's pretty sure that Thor is dead. The problem being that you have a very heroic character being treated like absolute shit by the film, for no good reason, undermining him as a character, and somewhat taking away from the serious tone of planning to stop Thanos. Another quick example are the irreverent jokes where a character explains the situation they're in, or part of the world, or something that should be normal to them in-universe, in such a way as to make it sound stupid to the audience, to highlight the unusual aspects of it, oftentimes mocking the source material, such as superhero movies mocking the fact they wear some of the costumes they do. The humor and silly moments in Bethesda Fallout is much the same. In a water crisis where no one has clean, safe water to drink, you have people LARPing as costume comic book characters, thus undermining the impact of the water crisis on the capital Wasteland. One of about 100 examples for that, by the way. The silliness went way up with Fallout 2, but I wouldn't say the sincerity went down too much. Again, yes, you had the hubologists, which weren't great, and the president of the Enclave is an idiot, but again, most of the substantive story content was handled very well. Most of the silly aspects came in with the pop culture references and random encounters. The Monty Python bridge encounter is dumb and shouldn't be in the game, but that's clearly not meant to be taken as a serious part of the world, and it doesn't undermine the stories or characters of the NCR or the Enclave, or anyone else in the world. People cite the Golden Globes boob joke, as if that's somehow solid proof that the setting isn't serious, as if jokes cannot exist in such a world without inherently making it silly. Fisto existing in New Vegas doesn't undermine any of the big factions or characters, and again, makes sense within the setting. It's a very important distinction to make that how certain silly or comedic elements are handled and implemented into the work can either fit in well, or get a pass, or even be ignored. I don't like the Monty Python bridge encounter in Fallout 2, but I can compartmentalize that away as something that isn't meant to be taken as a true part of the world or narrative. I can't do that with the Nuka-Cola Challenge, the Superhuman Gambit, Kid in a Fridge, Nuka World, or the Fallout show, none of which are treated as though they're not supposed to be taken as a true part of the world.
Both of those things still have tons of serious moments, even if they don't have moments where you like kidnap a kid and sell them into slavery, or trick a kid to follow you to get captured by slavers, or themes of rape or other really serious topics. Crazy Easter eggs don't make a game a joke, but a trait that you can select at the beginning that adds a bunch of Star Trek and Star Wars references, that is kind of silly.
Again, he's either just ignoring the point of Wild Wasteland, or he's too stupid to understand why it exists. Can't really say much about it without just reiterating things I've already said.
Combined with all of the other goofiness throughout the entire game. All of the games and the TV show have serious moments. Serious, dark, messed up moments, and they all have goofy, silly moments.
And again, he's not bothering to make a distinction. And again, he's an idiot.
Fallout 1 I've never played, so I can't really give much feedback about that, and maybe it's true that Fallout 1 has no jokes, has no goofy moments, no silliness at all.
No one said that. Probably the best example of how he's not even attempting to understand the arguments being made. He takes the criticism against the overabundance of silly nonsense as damaging to the setting, and the impression he gets is that Fallout 1 had no jokes or silly moments at all, even though no one said that. Once again, he's coming into a discussion he doesn't understand and knows nothing about. He's practically fighting ghosts here because he's assuming what's being said.
But I've seen enough about Fallout 2, I've played enough of the others, that absolutely every other Fallout past the first one.
Whoa, hold on, slow down there. You've seen enough about Fallout 2. Seen, not played. He distinguished Fallout 2 specifically as one he's seen stuff about, but has not played. How much is enough? What is your definition of enough? Is it watching a video where someone lists all the silly stuff in Fallout 2, and you take that at face value as being the game and just run with that, like most Bethesda fans who make this argument do? This is part of the problem with this whole particular issue. There are plenty of Bethesda Fallout fans who have never played the first two games, but have watched videos about them from some of the bigger Fallout YouTubers. The kind who are overly positive and not very critical towards Bethesda, who either intentionally or unintentionally have crafted this narrative about Fallout 1, and especially Fallout 2, that portrays it as though Bethesda hasn't actually done all that much to damage the lore and tone of Fallout. That it was always a big dumb joke like the Bethesda titles are. This man is speaking with authority that the sincerity, the tone, and the silly aspects of these games didn't change much from Fallout 2 onwards, with the exception of 76 in the show, when he hasn't even played Fallout 2. That he got all of his information about the game secondhand.
But I've seen enough about Fallout 2, I've played enough of the others, that absolutely every other Fallout past the first one, which is coming out at 30 years old, is not fully serious, that it's only partly serious. That there is tons of humor and a lot of jokes and pop culture references totally thrown in and intermixed within the game.
Once again, wording is important. Listen to what he said there. Only partly serious. Tons of humor, lots of jokes and pop culture references. Partly serious implies that a lesser part of the games are serious. I would not describe some 80% as partly. When I say something as partly something, I'd be referring to like 30% or less. Google says the definition is to some extent, not completely. And I know some pedant will say that 80% is still partly, but look at it this way. The Lord of the Rings has a few jokes in it, a few lighthearted funny moments, but no one would describe it as a comedy. No one would even describe it as partly a comedy because of those jokes, even though they're still there to some extent, but not completely. Yes, there are more humorous moments in Fallout than Lord of the Rings, but that's besides the point. The point is that saying Fallout is only partly serious is very much downplaying just how serious the games are, especially following up with saying that there's tons of humor and a lot of jokes and references. It's also just not accurate to say there's tons of humor and lots of jokes. Some? Yes. Tons and lots? No. I think this is an issue of those moments standing out more for some people, so they remember them more. It's kind of the same effect that commercials have. A lot of commercials are stupid and annoying, specifically so you'll remember them more easily. That, combined with people like the old knight here going murder hobo and not actually paying attention to the world, and not taking the story seriously at all, and it makes for the perfect cocktail of spewing ignorant bullshit and misrepresenting the games to a pretty heavy degree.
The show, I didn't like the Fallout show, but that show, you can't say it's bad because they put in jokes.
God, this guy really is just absolutely brain dead. No one is saying the show is bad, because they put jokes into the show. The issue is that the jokes themselves were bad, and they were intrusive and damaging to the serious moments, and especially damaging to the characters and world and story. The whole Vault 4 story arc is approximately 2 episodes worth of time spent building up Vault 4 to appear nefarious and secretive and shady, only to reveal they weren't actually evil at all, and it's capped off with a joke about Lucy being executed, and Maximus tard raging, attacking, and probably killing people, because he didn't stop to learn anything about the situation. This makes the people of Vault 4 look stupid, by not being upfront to newcomers about what's going on at the Vault, so there's no confusion. It makes Maximus look like even more of a violent, stupid idiot than he already does for walking in, not even looking at Lucy, who he's there to save and who's already free and safe, and he instead just blindly starts attacking people and destroying things.
I don't like the jokes, but I'm also an old man. I'm clearly not the target audience. It was freakishly popular, and the most of the people online complaining about it are probably my age. Like, sorry, Grandpa, it's for the kids. It's not for you. And yes, I know it's rated whatever, but it's for the 17-year-olds. It's for the 19-year-olds. Nobody cares about your 45-year-old ass. You're not important anymore. Take care of your kids. Don't you have bills to pay, dipshit?
There's so much wrong with this, I don't even know where to begin. It's weird seeing this get applied to Fallout of all things, but the argument that it's for kids, therefore it's okay that it's shit, is not a good argument on its face. I don't even think I need to say any more than that. This also just isn't even true. If you could ask the people at Bethesda and ZeniMax and Microsoft and Amazon who the target audience is, I seriously doubt they're going to say it's for 17 and 19-year-olds. In fact, they'll probably say that it's for mature audiences. Not as in the ESRB rating, but towards young adults to middle-aged adults. They probably have their target demographics at like 18 to 35 or some such. Not to mention, they likely consider longtime fans of the games to be part of their target demographic regardless of their actual age. They are building these new entries off an existing brand after all, that comes with an existing built-in audience. That is a huge part of the value of big-name franchises. Also, the idea that you can't criticize something because you're outside the target demographic is just retarded. It's arbitrarily saying that people can't criticize something for no actual good reason. This isn't criticizing the Care Bears for not telling more dark and gritty stories. It's criticizing a game company for bastardizing a series and ruining it.
Alright, enough of the Fallout to joke or Fallout to serious or not talk. That's not really important. The point of this video is that they're all insane.
Wait, that was another tangent? We were about 11 minutes and 50 seconds into a 16-minute and 25-second long video. Out of this time, he spent close to 12 minutes of it tangenting about things that aren't related to the point the video is about, leaving himself about 4.5 minutes to talk about the actual point of the video. Only about a quarter of his video will be about the actual subject he's here to talk about.
I think I've shown enough evidence on screen that Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and Fallout New Vegas are thoroughly and deeply loved online, and that Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and the Fallout TV show receive insane amounts of hate. People really hate them on the internet. But guess what? What do you think made the most money?
For some reason, nearly every Bethesda defender will eventually whip out this argument like it's some kind of trump card, like it's some kind of kill shot to any criticism against their games. You think the writing in Fallout 4 is bad? Well, I'll have you know it made more money than the other Fallout games did. We're not discussing how much the games made, though. We're discussing the quality of the games. This is a fallacy known as the appeal to success or appeal to popularity. Essentially, that because something is successful, or more successful than something else, or because something is popular, that thereby means it's good, or better than the thing it's being compared to. X made more money than Y, therefore X is better than Y. More people like X than they do Y, therefore X is better than Y. This argument takes no account for any shifts in the audience, the quality of the content, any changes to that content, personal taste among individual people, or any other countless factors. The presumption that success or popularity means something is good implies a belief that people only like something because it is good, thus explaining its success or popularity, and leaving no room for the innumerable possible reasons why individual people may like or dislike something. In short, this argument is usually made by utter brain-dead morons who can't even comprehend that success or popularity is not necessarily indicative of quality. People like this are unable to understand that someone may well like something that is poorly written or poorly made because they found some level of fun or enjoyment from it for one reason or another. The phrases mindless fun or guilty pleasure exist for a reason. People telling you to turn your brain off to enjoy something happens for a reason. Usually to say that the writing is awful, but you could still find the gameplay fun, or that you could still enjoy dumb action in a poorly written film. He doesn't actually argue against any points being made. He doesn't respond to any criticisms against Bethesda Fallout with sound and logical counter-arguments, because he can't. We've already seen him try. What's that? The Kings aren't a joke because the game treats them seriously? Pfft, what a joke. That's his argument. Instead, he pulls out the lame-ass kill shot of citing sales numbers, which is only convincing to people who think success is indicative of anything besides success. He thinks one game having a bigger number than the other game makes it a better game. He literally says that later on, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
We can go online and see what people are playing now, what people are watching right now, what made the most money. That's just something that's out there, that information. And sure, the numbers aren't all exact, but I think we all know what the numbers are.
It's genuinely embarrassing and cringe-inducing that he thinks he's got something here.
Even before we look. Let's just take a quick look at some sales estimates and some Steam charts for current players. Fallout 1, back in the day, this amount of sales, 600,000, was a smashing success. It was huge, it was great, it was awesome, and people loved it. That's why Fallout 2 came out. Fallout 2 was still pretty much a success, but getting way less sales is obviously not a good thing. And what's worse is that then they spent more money on things like Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and that completely bombed, and it was an awful game. Tactics was okay, I guess, that's what I've heard. But still, all of them combined are just barely passing 1 million in sales. It is not until Bethesda buys the IP and makes their own game. Brotherhood of Steel tried to make it some action-y RPG, less serious game, and nobody cared. Bethesda was actually able to make a good game out of that and got over 12 million in sales. People loved Fallout 3.
This is quite possibly one of the dumbest arguments I've ever seen, and this is probably the greatest evidence that we're dealing with a legitimately stupid person here. He's looking purely at sales numbers without considering a multitude of factors that would affect these numbers. This doesn't consider the shift in demographics, the popularity of game companies and gaming as a whole, let alone different trends in the industry. It's just this caveman logic of big number bigger than small number, big number better. To explain quickly, gaming was much more of a nerdy niche thing back then. You were still considered a dork by a lot of people if you played video games. As such, there's a much smaller audience to sell games to than in 2008, let alone 2015. Further, Fallout 1 and 2 were limited to computers. They did not make these games for consoles. Brotherhood of Steel was on consoles and not PC, but that's also widely considered to be a bad game anyways. By 2008, gaming was booming as an industry, and there was a much wider audience as a result. Even if Fallout 3 had only sold 2 million copies and was a failure, that would have meant it had way more sales than the originals, Tactics, and Brotherhood combined, but that still wouldn't necessarily mean it's a better game. By that same token, having 12 million sales or 12 billion sales doesn't necessarily mean it's a good game either. Again, success is indicative of success, not quality. There are plenty of examples of something being well made and still flopping, or garbage being a total success. Blade Runner is famous for being a box office failure, but gaining a cult following, and being a generally beloved and revered movie for being so good. The Thing was a box office flop, but is now a beloved horror movie. How do you explain that? Do you really think that a movie that made $1 more than Blade Runner or The Thing is just inherently better because it made more money? Do you see how nonsense this kind of argumentation becomes when you apply any amount of logic to it? This further doesn't take into account that Fallout 3 came a couple of years after Oblivion, and Bethesda was riding high at the time. They were super popular and well known as a company. They just had their most successful game at the time, and they were almost becoming a household name. Their next game was going to do well no matter what. Fact of the matter is that many people's tastes in entertainment don't necessarily rely on the writing being good, or the gameplay being good. Fact is, you could boot up a game and mindlessly shoot enemies for 2 hours, loot a bunch of items from them in the dungeon they're in for that sweet dopamine hit, and find it fun and enjoyable despite any amount of bad writing or jank gameplay, as long as you find it fun. This isn't even accounting for the fact there's still many people who think the writing is good, people who ignore the problems in the writing, people who supplement their own headcanon to make up for the problems with the writing, and even people who enjoy the games despite the bad writing. Fact is, only an absolute idiot would take the sales numbers of 600,000 and 12 million, devoid of any other context or information, and conclude that the 12 million must inherently be better because it's a bigger number.
People loved Fallout 3. Not really my kind of game, I didn't really like it.
But I thought Fallout 3 was good. How could you not like it? Unless personal taste doesn't actually rely on quality. What a self-defeating statement. If you acknowledge the fact that you can dislike something despite it supposedly being good, you must also accept the fact that people can like something despite it being bad, and by extension, that something being bad isn't necessarily a barrier to success. I could also just go for the easy example of McDonald's food being bad for you, yet it's the most successful fast food restaurant in the world.
The first one I liked was Fallout New Vegas, another smashing success by Obsidian. And if I want to say my favorite thing about Fallout New Vegas, it is that you can kill everyone. That is really what makes it special and unique. People talk about the writing or the gray morality. No, all that's bullshit. You can kill anyone. And that makes it special. That's why it is actually a legendary game.
I almost don't feel the need to say anything here. This basically speaks for itself.
Fallout 4 blew it out of the water, and Fallout 76, well, it actually was considered a massive flop, and these are sales from 2018, and recently after the show came out, it's actually been getting a lot more sales. And you can tell by the player numbers that it's actually doing pretty well now. So if we look at the Steam charts, again, nobody's playing Fallout 1 and 2.
If you thought you'd heard the most stupid thing in this guy's video, I'm sorry to have disappointed you by playing that last clip. I'm convinced this guy is sub 50 IQ. I'm convinced the top of his skull is concave. Whenever it rains, he probably needs to tip his head to the side so too much water doesn't collect in the bowl that is the top of his skull. I feel bad for George constantly having to hear about the rabbits from this fucking idiot. As if the previous example of the sales numbers weren't bad enough, he's now comparing the player count of games released in 1997 and 1998 to games released over a decade later and from wildly different genres of gameplay. This is quite possibly one of the most pointless things you could ever do, unless you're specifically trying to show the change in general gaming audience across the years. The original Call of Duty, released in 2003, had 46 people playing on Steam 16 minutes ago at the time of writing this. The Call of Duty released in 2022 had nearly 60,000 people playing about an hour ago at the time of writing this. Do you know what these numbers tell me? That people don't play old games as much as new games. Fucking breaking new ground here. There's people who weren't even born yet in 2003 that are playing this Call of Duty game right now. Go to any long-running franchise, aside from some rare exceptional circumstances, you're gonna see the same thing across the board. It's just a fact that older games are generally played much less than newer games for a multitude of reasons. What a fucking idiotic point to try and make.
Really, it's not until New Vegas that you get a decent amount of numbers. Now, I don't want to say no one. For this old of games, these are actually very, very, very popular. Both Fallout 1, Fallout 2, and Fallout 3. Very popular for this old of games. And New Vegas, crazy popular for how old it is. But to pretend like nobody likes Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, more people like these games.
Who is pretending that no one likes Fallout 4 and 76? Genuinely, who said this? I don't even think the biggest Bethesda haters out there would say that nobody likes these games. It's an objective fact that people do like them. Genuinely, who are you arguing against here? Must be more ghosts.
From the only objective measure we have, they are better games.
See, he did say it. Bigger sales number and player number means better game. These stupid spreadsheet arguments are another reason I wanted to cover this video. This is too monolithically stupid to not mock for the utter retarded horseshit that it is. This is also part of the reason why no part of this video is trying to appeal to him, or his common sense or basic logic in any way. He has none. He's a complete brain-dead idiot. People like the old knight have to rely on these kinds of arguments because they can't argue on the actual merits of the games. They have to use these lame-ass arguments based on sales numbers because it sounds good on the surface and people who aren't too invested will likely accept it at face value. 12 million sales? 25 million sales? Wow, that must be good if that many people like it. But again, success does not mean quality. The 4 Jurassic World movies were all dog shit but successful. The Rise of Skywalker was successful. The 1998 Godzilla movie made a lot of money, but got panned by critics. Again, only someone who is a complete idiot like the old knight, or someone who is ignorant, would cite sales numbers as their killshot argument against criticism against something, as if popularity or success means anything to the criticism against that thing in the first place. And no, sales numbers aren't the only objective measure we have. That's also an extremely retarded thing to say. We have the games themselves and can compare the quality of the gameplay, and more importantly for these games in particular, the story. Anytime this gets brought up, there will inevitably be the people who cry that art is subjective, which is nothing more than a convenient way to excuse and ignore any and all problems the work has. This argument also comes from the media literacy crowd who like to tell you that you're watching movies wrong, but I digress. What a piece of art makes you feel, how much you like or dislike it. That is your subjective feelings on it, and nothing can really take that away or deny your opinion. The actual contents of the art, though, that is objective. You can go through a story and figure out whether or not it makes sense, find out if it's well written. However many people like or dislike a story is irrelevant to its actual objective quality, how well it's written, whether it's good or bad. I'd argue one of the most important defining features of humanity is our ability to tell stories. Storytelling across multiple mediums are the biggest entertainment industries. It's a way for us to convey ideas or morals to one another. Hell, it's a big part of basic communication between people. Telling someone how your day was is telling someone a story. Telling someone what happened to you 20 years ago is telling someone a story. And what is a story but a sequence of events? If something in that sequence seems off or isn't clicking, it can make you ask questions. If the work fails to explain such important things, it could end up being a bad story. Cops and lawyers have to deal with this often with suspected criminals, which they need to figure out if someone is guilty of a crime. Plenty of criminals have been caught because their stories didn't add up, or conflicted with the story made up by other criminals if it's a group of people arrested for a crime. In much the same way such stories don't add up, actual writing of movies, games, and books and so forth can also fail to add up. Example I like to use for Fallout 3 is Colonel Autumn surviving Project Purity. He plays an animation where he injects himself with something to save himself from the radiation, but what that is never explained or mentioned by anyone anywhere. There is literally zero information on what this is that saves his life. That's bad writing, because you've added an element to the game that can allow someone to survive extremely lethal radiation that otherwise kills people in seconds, but doesn't exist in any other instance where it might be needed. There is no explanation for this event that has a very major effect on the story. In similar fashion, we learn that the entrance to Vault 87 is extremely lethal due to radiation, so much so that it can instantly kill you before you even get close. Yet it's part of the story that super mutants bring people here to this vault to convert them into more super mutants.
And it is crazy hearing so many YouTubers act like their opinion is objective reality when they're talking about these games.
That's wild to hear after you just claim that sales numbers mean they're better games. I dislike Fallout 3 and 4. That is my subjective feeling towards them. But when I call them objectively bad games, that is based entirely on the content within those games. Those two examples I just gave of Colonel Autumn and Vault 87, none of that is subjective opinion, none of that is how I personally feel. That is strict analysis of the content within the game, without headcanon or made-up information. It is an objective fact that there is no information on Autumn's radiation immunity whatsoever. None. Zero. All we've got is an animation. Same for Vault 87's door. Running up to it will kill you. The door itself does not function since you're never supposed to enter through this way. NPCs in the world will tell you that you'll never make it to the door. There's even a dead NPC in a rad suit near the door. The rads get into the multiple thousands, when only 1,000 rads will kill you instantly. Again, none of that is personal opinion, that is pure objective reality. That's what's in the game. That is undeniable fact. As such, the fact that super mutants bring people here to convert them becomes a plot hole, since their subjects would all die before they even got them inside the vault to expose them to FEV. These are two objective writing flaws with the game. Now obviously, these two problems alone don't make the writing of Fallout 3 bad, but there's also very few writing flaws that are so apocalyptically bad as to single-handedly destroy a story. It's almost always a death by 1,000 cuts, and Fallout 3 and 4 absolutely fit the bill, with the absolute plethora of writing issues they have across every part of both games.
People don't want to play Fallout 1 and 2 right now. It's a very outdated old game, and maybe the writing's great. Don't care. I'm not going to go back and play it. You can, but people really just want to watch a YouTube video about the master. They don't want to go play Fallout 1.
Another essentially meaningless statement. It seems entirely irrelevant to the subject.
I think in conclusion, the point I want to hammer home is that is that people really love to hate watch content. They're watching content that hates Fallout 4, that hates Fallout 76, that hates the Fallout TV show because they don't like these things.
Yes, people care about the franchises that they really like and have personal investment in. When they see problems with them, that annoys them. Then they either go watch videos talking about those problems, or they'll make videos talking about those problems that they had with those bad entries to the franchises that they like. People do this with everything. There's a level of catharsis to listen to someone tear apart some awful movie or game that is damaging or ruining a franchise you like. There's also a level of catharsis to be the one to do it yourself. This is going to come as a shock to you, old knight, but people don't like bad entries into the things they like.
But this cocky attitude of calling yourself an elitist because you like a different video game, sorry, that doesn't make you elite.
Another argument so stupid I wanted to make this video. Another instance of the old knight fighting ghosts. I've genuinely never heard of anyone actually calling themselves elite or elitist. I've only ever heard it in cartoons like some Seto Kaiba shit. Unlike you, I'm an elite duelist. I think this argument in particular best highlights just how uninformed this guy was when he made this video. It's like he's heard a third or fourth or fifth hand account of the people he's responding to. Because again, I've never known anyone to call themselves an elitist over, well, anything really. I've only ever seen it used in a derogatory sense, usually to dismiss criticism. I've had other people call me an elitist, despite the fact I've never actually acted that way. I've never claimed to be better than anyone because I like a particular video game or movie or what have you. I've been highly critical of movies and games. I've been critical of people who use bad arguments in defense of those movies and games, but I don't usually consider one's taste in media to make them a better or worse person than anyone else, unless we're talking like the absolute worst of the worst. I've never considered myself to be better than anyone else because of my personal taste in entertainment. I consider myself to be better than the old knight, but that's not because of anyone's taste in games. I consider myself to be better than him because he's a brain-dead fucking idiot. He goes on in his example, but I'm gonna cut it because it's basically a bunch of nothing.
These Fallout YouTubers are absolutely batty, and I think even more insane is the viewers. This is what the viewers want. The viewers want people who will shit on everything that's newer than Fallout New Vegas and shit on Bethesda.
So first off, it's never a good idea to shit on the viewers as a collective, because some of those viewers could be some of your viewers. Never attack the audience. You're only showing yourself to be a piece of shit when you do this. We've also got another absolutely brain-dead argument that only idiots use. Most people don't want to shit on new things. Most people want new things to be good. Like, I need you to understand the level of stupidity needed to actually believe this argument. That people just want to hate new things. It basically relies on the belief that fans of a series will collectively pick an arbitrary spot like a fucking hive mind, to just hate anything newer than that spot they picked, rather than for any genuine reason for them to start hating newer things. We've seen this countless times across many franchises, and people like the Old Knight have to ignore reality to make this retarded argument. The line isn't arbitrary, it's often because quality goes down. The very thing people like the Old Knight seem to want to ignore. This happened with Star Wars from the OT to the prequels, and even from the prequels to the Disney era. The Next Generation era of Star Trek is highly regarded for the most part, with a bit of a rough period with Enterprise, and falling off a cliff with modern Star Trek. People loved Game of Thrones. Then what happened? The writing quality declined after Season 4. Hype and fandom kept it going, but it cratered in the final season with how awful it was. Doctor Who had reached the height of its popularity. It became mainstream in North America, then the writing went down the shitter, as did the views. Most people who want to watch videos shitting on newer Fallout and modern Bethesda don't do so because of arbitrary hate. They do so because they hate seeing the things they love get destroyed by incompetence and apathy. Bethesda used to be my favorite game company. It was my childhood dream to go work there and be a part of making their future games. I don't shit on them for no reason, but because there's been a clear and steady downtrend in the quality of their games since I became a fan of theirs back with Morrowind, which is still my all-time favorite game to this day. I don't want to hate modern Fallout, I want modern Fallout to be good, but we're not getting that, so I'm gonna call out the problems I find in their games, because I find it frustrating that they keep making these awful games. That's about it for his video. He says it's a low-effort video, which is pretty obvious from how thoroughly awful it is, but that is more or less it. Now there is one last thing I want to address before I end this video, because it's pretty insane. Enclave Emily made a response to his video, and he made a response to that. I caught some of her stream, and learned of a particular thing he said in his video. At least twice, actually.
And shortly after doing this, I realized Emily doesn't even believe that there isn't a lot of negative content about Fallout. Obviously, he knows that. He makes a ton of it. He has sex with Creetosis, and Creetosis, that's like his thing. He knows about it. He makes a bunch of it. So does Creetosis, and I'm pretty sure those two have sex with each other.
Needless to say, I was caught off guard to learn some random weirdo on the internet is fantasizing that I have sex with one of my friends. A friend I've never met and lives on the other side of an ocean, by the way. This really strikes me as some touch-starved, porn-addicted behavior. It reminds me of Tumblrinas and Twitter freaks, who see two real people who are friends and immediately start shipping them. It is genuinely demented behavior, and I think this guy might have some actual mental issues. In conclusion, this is a terrible video by an utter brain-dead weirdo. He says this is a low-effort video, which is clear on its face. But that is not a shield from criticism. That is not a free pass to spout utter nonsense without anyone criticizing the stupid and insane things you're saying. The old knight makes a video talking about how Fallout fans are crazy, and fails to ever actually make that point, even after saying he's getting back on track multiple times. The final time he says this, he whips out an Excel spreadsheet with irrelevant numbers and begins talking about that, making some of the dumbest arguments imaginable based on those numbers, instead of talking about the supposed insanity of Fallout fans that this video is supposed to be about. From that point, he spends the rest of his time fighting ghosts, or alternatively, fighting his own straw men because he's arguing against claims no one has ever actually made. His sad excuse for story analysis is a little more than petulant reductiveness towards every aspect of the game he talks about, culminating in him going on a murder spree because of being inconvenienced. He will frequently say things are a problem, without even attempting to explain himself, as if his own incredulity should be evidence enough of what the problem is, and convincing enough for you to agree. Finally, he jumps into the debate regarding how serious or silly Fallout is, and tries to speak with authority that the jokey, silly aspect hasn't gotten worse since Fallout 2, despite never actually having played the game, and the best argument he's got is to essentially regurgitate things he's heard from other YouTubers ad nauseum, as if the repetition of, "But Fallout was always silly, look at these random Easter eggs," is in any way a compelling argument. By the way, the background footage for my sections of this video have been gameplay from Fallout 2. Last time I played, I was midway through the game, but that save got corrupted, so I had to start over. But as you can tell from the gameplay, this game ain't 1,000 jokes per minute. But quite possibly the worst part of the whole video was the pure unfiltered stupidity on display. Citing a trait that was specifically made to section away the inexcusable jokey material so as to not damage the tone, in order to claim New Vegas was always silly. Citing the Steam charts player numbers for Fallout 1 and 2 being low, especially compared to newer titles, as if that means anything. As if the same thing isn't true for the vast majority of old games. Using the caveman logic of, bigger number means better game, unironically. This level of unrestrained stupidity is actually offensive to witness, and anyone making such arguments should feel deeply embarrassed. To cap it off, he apparently has demented fantasies about total strangers on the internet having a sexual relationship, like a brain-rotted Tumblrina circa 2013. This was a shit video with some of the worst arguments I've seen in a long time, and it is wild to hear someone claim anyone else is crazy, when he probably belongs in a psych ward himself. But that's all I've got for today. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and check out my other videos. I also do gaming streams on my side channel, so check them out.